Hi there, this is Nazry from the Malay Heritage Centre, and thanks for joining us for our first digital edition of a series of talks that we've organised as part of our special exhibition, Seekor Singa, Seorang Putra dan Sepingkai Cermin, which is now available to visit online from the comforts of your home. Today's talk is entitled Human Animal, and we're going to learn about the history of Singapore and the Malay world through stories taken from the natural environment, from tales about ferocious were-tigers to latex trees and Malayan tapirs. Our speakers for today will show how these stories not only reveal more about our history, but potentially has implications for our future as well. If you have any comments or questions during the course of these talks, feel free to leave them in the comment section below.
I'm Martyn Low from the Gongchen Natural History Museum at the National University of Singapore. I'm a research associate there. I have always been interested in science and nature, and especially in the past few years, I have become a lot more interested in natural history. The Gongchen Natural History Museum is a department at the National University of Singapore under the Faculty of Science. We currently hold the zoological collections that used to be at Raffles Library and Museum, which is today known as the National Museum at Stamford Road. What happened was in the late 1960s and 1970s with independence, the zoological collection that was at the Raffles Museum / National Museum was moved out to the then University of Singapore, where it was decided that the university would become the custodian of that collection. In 2015, we opened a new building. The department was renamed the Gongchen Natural History Museum. The building is now 5 years old. As a department as well, we are 5 years old. So we have a lot more space now, especially for public galleries. So we have 2 floors dedicated to galleries that are open to the public, both permanent ones as well as a smaller temporary gallery where we have exhibitions that change once or twice a year. Things have changed. Our old gallery, although it was just basically one room, was a lot more, you could say, intimate. You could get a lot closer to some of the exhibits. Of course, there were all these warning signs telling you not to touch anything. You could get quite close. Whereas our new gallery is a completely different experience. It takes you basically through a journey to explore life on Earth with a focus on Southeast Asia. Things have changed. And we recognize it's also important that visitors and students who we engage with need to have some personal connection to some of the specimens and the displays. And one way of doing that, of course, is to tell stories. To commemorate Singapore's bicentennial, the Gongchen Natural History Museum received support from National Heritage Board to create content for an exhibition, which at the end of it was titled 200, A Natural History. The idea behind the exhibition was to tell 200 stories, be it events, people, specimens, or even objects that bring to life the story of Singapore's natural history over that 200 years. You can see the outgrowth of this idea of like a single natural history narrative or study that has branched out and become professionalized into things like botany, zoology, microbiology, life sciences, pharmacology, and it's all just grown out from that. From the beginning, we felt if we featured the entire span of that 2 centuries, people will be able to see that, yes, we started off as being a colony. We had the first few discoveries within the Western scientific framework were made by employees of the British East India Company. There's no escaping that. But as things change through 2 centuries, I think the exhibition has made clear that yes, there was all that going on, there has been changes, and there will continue to be changes. East India Company's role, and as the company declined, you have the British government taking over, you have European explorers, and then you have the rise of the Raffles Museum in the 1880s, and how natural history was very much centered upon the museum. And then from there, you have people like Eric Alfred, who was the first Singaporean director of the museum, and it becomes a lot more Singaporean. I'm a bit biased in terms of the story, but one of my favorite specimens on display is actually the souvenir, the piece of telegraph cable. So this is a undersea telegraph cable that was actually laid in 1858. It was not a piece that actually went down into the sea. It was excess. They over-budgeted for the length of cable to link Britain and America. At the end of the endeavor, after it was laid, they had this huge amount of excess of telegraph cable, and Tiffany, the jeweler, bought up the entire stock, and they cut it into lengths about this long. To prevent it from fraying, they put very nice Tiffany advertising on it. They sold them. They're not too difficult to find, so there are thousands of these pieces all over the place. The significance of it for natural history in Singapore is actually very interesting because it's not evident, and it's something I like to call a forgotten necessity. This doctor called Montgomery, he was one of the first people to plant nutmegs in Singapore, but he also saw the locals using a form of plastic that, when put into boiling water, would become soft enough for you to mold. It's actually used locally for things like the handles of barangs, making toys and other trinkets. Being a medical doctor, he thought that this would be fantastic to make splints and other medical devices. So he actually sent a sample of it back to the UK. He actually won an award for that. They really later realized it was such a useful product. It basically started this entire craze to see what kind of things it could be used for. This, of course, is gutta percha. They put it onto things like raincoats, which is why they call them Macintoshes. They use them in golf balls. So they found all these uses, and they found another use for it because, unlike natural rubber, which was originally from Brazil, it does not harden or become brittle in cold water or salt water. They realized gutta percha was perfect for insulating telegraph cables before they were laid under the sea. This latex, which, unlike the rubber from Brazil, cannot be tapped. In order to procure the latex, you actually need to cut down the entire tree and basically wring the bark and extract the latex by dripping it. It actually causes the death of the tree. The amounts that can be extracted are actually minuscule. They estimated that a tree about this big would only give you about 1/4 kilo of product. 1 mile of a telegraph cable would require several kilograms of it. They estimate trees were being felled by the millions to feed this trade. And of course, because the telegraph became of strategic importance to the British Empire, the gutta percha and the gutta percha trees also became of strategic importance. I like this particular artifact because it's just one piece of cable, but there's all these intertwining threads and stories that are all linked to that. And it's nice because the telegraph network was also seen as bringing things together. Voices came in and out through different nodes, through different telegraph stations. So it's that nice mirroring. I fully understand and appreciate. There were very negative side effects as well. I mean, the telegraph cable, of course, led to all kinds of things. It also led to the gutta percha tree being declared extinct in the 1850s in Singapore. So they were actually very worried that if they lost this tree, they would have problem with the telegraph cable system. The British at the Botanic Gardens actually started one of the earliest conservation programs, what we call ex situ conservation programs. So they would take the tree out of the forest and plant it to try and conserve it because they were that worried about the supply. Nowadays, if you talk to most people, they would not know what gutta percha is unless you have had root canal. One of the few places where gutta percha is still used in is to fill the canal that's left after you have removed all the blood vessels. So the very fragrant smell that you get when the dentist cauterizes or burns the latex is actually gutta percha. So if you have a root canal done, you will know what it smells like, and you'll be carrying a little bit of it in you. One of the other interesting stories that I came across while doing research for both our exhibitions and for some of the other exhibitions that the Gongchen Natural History Museum was involved in was that of the tapir, or more formally the Malayan tapir. This very interesting story or tale of how Raffles and Farquhar were actually basically competing to see who would discover it first. I'm not so sure that Farquhar was intentionally trying to do one up from Raffles, but Raffles certainly was not happy with what Farquhar was doing. I think this goes back to even the days when Farquhar was in Malacca and he had a tapir with him. He made drawings of it, he did a study on it. It was said to be eating crumbs from, I think, off his table, and it was like a pet. He submitted this research that he did to a journal called the Asiatic Researchers in Calcutta. The editor of the journal, I believe, was Wallich, and Wallich received a letter from Raffles instructing him to pull Farquhar's manuscript, not publish it, and instead replace it with Raffles's manuscript. We do not know if Wallich ever replied to Raffles, but eventually Farquhar's manuscript was published, so Wallich somehow decided that he wouldn't bother with Raffles's request. The earliest description of a Malayan tapir appeared in English as authored by William Farquhar. That was basically it. But we now know that because of Raffles's association with two French naturalists, Diard and Duvassel, parts of Farquhar's manuscript was actually copied and sent back to Cuvier, whom both the French naturalists were very close to. So Cuvier actually published an even earlier description in French. A collaborator of Cuvier actually gave the tapir a Latin name. This was Desmarest. Basically, the French scooped the English when it came to describing and naming the tapir. But what was even more interesting is that when Zheng He went on his voyages, his translator, who also wrote an account of the voyages, he actually described an animal that we can now identify with a tapir. And that was almost 5 centuries before the French or the English were on the scene. So it's interesting to keep pushing back those boundaries of what we know and what we don't. But I must stress that when I say describing and naming these animals, not just the tapir, but all animals that have a scientific name, it is naming and describing them according to a Western framework, which is basically the framework that we call today natural history in all its modern forms, zoology, botany. We have to acknowledge that it's from the West, but at the same time, by acknowledging that, I think there is also a very important corollary to it, in that the West brought with it this framework of knowledge making, which entails, for example, naming it a certain way in Latin and describing it a certain way. And it creates its own taxonomies and nomenclatures. We should appreciate that because it has led to a lot of other things. But at the same time, we also have to remember and appreciate and continue to learn more about local taxonomies, local knowledge. As we continue to study natural history and we continue to learn more about what humans have done to the environment, how we have interacted with the environment, the changes we've caused, we have to continue to learn more about the other forms of knowledge making that were already in existence before Raffles, before even the Chinese. These animals have always been here. So when you said you discovered an animal, nowadays I tend to be very careful. So when I say discovered or named, I would either use inverted commas or I would qualify it as according to Western scientific principles. Because it's meaningless to say that you named the animal. The tapir has always had a Malay name, for example, I think they should go hand in hand. As we look at more sources from the colonial period, for example, we should also look at more sources from local materials. Due to historical circumstances, for example, one of the earliest accounts of the Sankanchil is in the National Library in France. So they are interlinked. Where our animals and plants have ended up, where our books and materials have ended up are interlinked. But I think it is a good time as we learn more about natural history from a Western perspective. We also learn more about the knowledge that was already here in Singapore, in the region. Yeah.
Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Nazry, Bahrawi, and I'm here to speak with you today about my research in Malay literature. In particular, I would like to touch on the ways through which Malay narratives imagine animals, which is a pet topic of mine, no puns intended. Animal studies have emerged as an important area in the discipline of environmental humanities. This is especially pertinent considering that we are facing the very real threat of climate change. Let us not forget that COVID-19 was speculated to have originated from an animal source, showing us how important it is for us to seriously consider how we treat animals. The question driving my research forward is this: how can the study of Malay narratives deepen our understanding of human-animal relations? My short answer to that is that we can learn a lot. But before I move forward, I would like to take you through one basic research principle of mine. As a comparative literature scholar, I primarily deal with texts. But texts do not just mean print materials, as many have taken it to mean. In cultural studies, scholars have defined text as a coherent stretch of language that may be regarded as an object for cultural analysis. This means that texts move beyond print materials and can also encompass products such as films as well as oral narratives. To this end, I have noticed that Malay texts, films, narratives, oral narratives, as well as print materials have an enduring tradition of engaging with animals. For instance, we know that the classical text Sejarah Melayu has instances of animals playing very important roles, moving the story forward. The kancil of the mouse deer, for instance, was instrumental to the founding of Malacca, while the todak or the garfish had posed a serious threat to the ancient kingdom of Temasek. Modern Malay texts too possess this trait of imagining animals. A number of short stories from the collection titled Nostalgia Yang Hilang by Singapore's Cultural Medallion winner Muhammad Latif Muhammad feature animals as protagonists. The Mondo or rat was the hero of one story, and in another story about rebellion, we see a rebellion by the lembu or the cow. If you are interested to read them but do not understand Malay, you can check out Lost Nostalgia, which is an English version of the book I translated. Let me now share examples of how one particular animals have been depicted in Malay narratives, and I want to talk about the tiger. While this majestic creature is today scarcely found in the forests of the Malay archipelago, it features very prominently in the oral folklores of the were-tigers, known in Malay as harimau jadian and in Javanese as macan gadungan. To be clear, tiger laws are not unique to the Malay world. They can also be found in India and China and other parts of the world where tigers used to roam free. What is interesting about the were-tiger in Malay narratives though is that they had not stayed a lore. They had in fact changed with the times and had modernized, just like you and I wearing modern clothes. One example of this is P. Ramlee's 1964 movie titled Sitora Harimau Jadian. In it, an individual became a were-tiger by blood transfusion, whereas in lores, you find that were-tigers were often created magically, such as through the transmigration of a human soul into a tiger's body, for instance. The idea of the were-tiger as an infectious disease speaks to our COVID-19 moment. It is perhaps also reminiscent of the European legends of the werewolf, where a person becomes such a creature when he or she is bitten by it. If you want to find out for yourself, you can consult the book Sitora Harimau Jadian, which was published in 2012 by Buku Fiksi, but please note that this book is in Malay. If, however, you cannot read Malay and you would still want to find out more about tiger narratives in the Malay archipelago, then I would recommend the novel Man Tiger by Indonesia's literary star Eka Kurniawan, originally written as Lelaki Harimau. While the were-tiger of Eka's book is still traditional in its transformation, which is different from Sitora Harimau Jadian, the character is rendered contemporary in the way it channels the book's themes of toxic masculinity and gender inequality. Some might say that themes such as toxic masculinity is a Western concern and has nothing to do with Malay societies. I would counter-argue that it would be too simplistic to say that the two narratives that I have highlighted are merely blind mimicry of discourses from the West. In fact, they are better seen as communal concerns that just happen to correspond to what is happening elsewhere. The propensity for reason and patriarchy are ubiquitous issues. You can find them in Western societies, but you can also find them in Malay societies too. This was what exactly Eka's response to being called the Gabriel Garcia Marquez of Southeast Asia by journalists writing from the Western Hemisphere, because they thought that he was channeling or championing the form of magic realism that started in Latin America. To this, Eka said that he did not intend to accomplish just that, but was in fact trying to channel forms of local narratives. Here the laws of Macan Gadungan or Harimau Jadian in Java comes to mind. This narrative suggests that animal tropes are a recurrent feature in Malay narratives. The text also suggests that these animal tropes are anthropomorphized. Don't be afraid of this word. It basically means that the animals have been attributed human characters or traits. The reasons why they are so prominent though in Malay narratives are not so clear. There may be plenty, but we can speculate that it has to do with the symbiotic relationship between humans and animals and nature that is characteristic of Malay lives in the kampong, in the pondok, in the kelong of yesteryears. Since the Nusantara's pre-colonial days, the varieties of peoples today collectively known as the Malays have existed in a sustainable partnership with their flora and fauna, taking only what they need while at the same time nurturing them, tending to them, and respecting them. This is also reflected through Pantang Larang Melayu, or traditional rules of abstinence that relate to nature. These rules embolden nature as a powerful force that is not to be trifled with. Take for instance the phrase, dilarang bersiul dalam rumah, nanti ular masuk, which translates to, do not whistle in the house, or else the snake will enter. This interdependence between humans and animals is sadly changing with rapid urbanization and development within the region. In parts of the Malay world, large swaths of land are being cleared to make way for palm oil plantations, displacing animals from their habitats, creating new environmental hazards such as the transboundary haze. Will arts imitate life though? The modern narratives that I have highlighted suggest that animals still matter in Malay narratives. This abiding sense of awe for nature's intrinsic value is something that the world can learn from Malay narratives, old and new. That's all from me today. Thank you for your attention.